I never expected my quiet cabin getaway to turn into a full-blown HOA nightmare, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened that morning. Picture this: the sun barely rising over the pine-covered hills, the smell of fresh coffee filling the air, and me, calmly reviewing some notes for my upcoming discussion with the State Attorney General. I had spent weeks coordinating this visit, ensuring everything was perfect. This wasn't just any casual meeting. This was a serious conversation about property rights, zoning laws, and HOA overreach. And yet, as I sipped my coffee, I had no idea that chaos was about to burst through my front door. It started with a knock, or rather what should have been a knock. My door swung open without so much as a warning, and there she was, HOA Karen. No notice, no permission, just a full-on invasion of my personal space. I froze. There's a certain kind of audacity it takes to walk into someone's home uninvited, and she carried it like a badge of honor. Her expression was smug, like she had every right to waltz through my cabin like it was public property. But here's the kicker. She had absolutely no idea who was inside with me. Behind me in the corner of my living room, the State Attorney General sat quietly, observing. I could feel the tension spike in the room, the kind that makes your chest tighten and your mind start racing. Karen had come in thinking she was enforcing rules, intimidating a resident who dared to own property outside her little fiefdom. But she had walked straight into a scenario far beyond her comprehension. I calmly placed my coffee cup down, my mind working faster than ever. I needed to assert control without escalating into a public confrontation, especially not with the state AG in my home. Karen began lecturing, reciting some long-forgotten HOA guideline about maintenance, access, and property inspections. I listened politely, nodding, all the while knowing she was about to be the one embarrassed in front of the highest legal authority in the state. Then I decided to turn the tables. I invited her to explain her right to enter my cabin, right there, with a government official observing every word. The smug smile faltered, replaced by hesitation, a crack in her armor. I could see it. She hadn't expected anyone to challenge her in a way that mattered. Not here, not with consequences. And just like that, the entire dynamic shifted. Karen had stepped into a storm she didn't even realize she had triggered. One misstep, one word, and her authority, what little she thought she had, could vanish in an instant. Little did she know, this was only the beginning. By the end of this encounter, she would be questioning every HOA rule she'd ever enforced, and I would have an unexpected ally standing right beside me. Karen froze, her mouth slightly open, as she realized she was no longer the one in control. The room felt electric. The sun streamed through the cabin windows, highlighting her shocked expression, and for the first time, she seemed small, vulnerable even. She had barged into my home thinking she could intimidate me, but I had the State Attorney General, quietly observing, and suddenly, the rules of this encounter had changed. I leaned against the counter, keeping my tone calm, almost casual. You know, I said, I appreciate that you care about our HOA rules, but you might want to explain to my guest here why you thought you could enter someone's home without consent. My words were measured, but the weight behind them was unmistakable. Karen's eyes flicked nervously toward the AG, who remained silent but observant, arms crossed, scanning every word, every gesture. Karen tried to recover, brushing off her intrusion as routine protocol. She mentioned something about emergency inspections and enforcing community standards, but her confidence was gone, replaced with a jittery awkwardness I hadn't seen before. I could feel the power shift in the room. Every word she uttered now sounded hollow. The more she tried to assert authority, the more it became obvious she had none here. I motioned toward the stack of papers on my dining table. Copies of my property deeds, local statutes, and county ordinances. I'm glad you brought that up, I said. Let's review the laws together, shall we? I want to make sure we're all on the same page. Karen hesitated, then began flipping through the papers I handed her, her voice quivering as she stumbled over citations she had never truly understood. It was clear she had been bluffing all along. The tension in the cabin was palpable. The state AG leaned forward slightly, nodding at points as Karen floundered. Every failed attempt to justify her intrusion only strengthened my position. I realized something crucial. This wasn't just about me standing up to an overreaching HOA member. This was about exposing a pattern, showing someone, with real authority, the reckless behavior that residents like me were being subjected to. By now, Karen's hands were trembling. She opened her mouth to speak, but quickly closed it, realizing every word could be evidence of her overreach. And then came the moment I had been waiting for. I calmly reminded her that unannounced, entry into a residence could constitute a legal violation. Her jaw dropped. She glanced at the AG again. Her face had gone pale. This was the turning point. Karen's dominance had completely dissolved. She had walked into what she thought was a routine enforcement scenario, only to find herself trapped in a legal minefield she couldn't navigate. And I could see the realization hit her. She was not in control, not even close. But the encounter wasn't over yet. Karen's next move would reveal just how far she was willing to go, and just how much trouble she was about to dig for herself. Karen's usual swagger was gone. Her confidence, the same one that allowed her to barge into homes without permission, had evaporated completely. She shifted from foot to foot, glancing nervously at the state attorney general, then back at me. I could see her mind racing, desperate to find a way to regain some shred of authority. But every move she considered only made her position weaker. I was just making sure everything was in order, she stammered, her voice cracking ever so slightly. You know, standard procedure. Her words trailed off, and for a moment, the room fell into silence except for the faint ticking of a wall clock. It was the kind of silence that forces reflection, where every misstep becomes painfully clear. I decided to apply a little pressure, not aggressively, but with precision. Standard procedure, I said slowly, usually involves notice and consent. Did you provide either? I raised an eyebrow, letting the question hang in the air. Karen's face turned red, a mixture of anger and embarrassment, but the answer was obvious. She had done neither. Then, sensing her panic, I shifted the conversation to the broader implications of her actions. You should understand, unannounced entry into a private residence isn't just rude, it's legally questionable. And today, you walked right into a situation that could set a precedent for all your HOA overreach. The state AG nodded slightly, eyes sharp, silently backing every word. Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. I could see her calculating, trying to salvage dignity that was slipping fast. Desperation changed her tone. She attempted to justify her intrusion, invoking obscure HOA clauses, trying to assert that the community's interest gave her some kind of authority. I smiled politely, letting her talk while subtly dismantling each claim. Each time she cited a rule, I countered with statutes, precedents, and county regulations. By the third counterpoint, she was visibly trembling. The facade of control had crumbled completely. And then came the moment of truth. Karen tried a final gambit, intimidation. She leaned in, voice sharp, eyes narrowing. You'll regret this if you involve outside authorities. But the threat fell flat. The state AG shifted slightly. A silent warning that her words carried no weight here. I simply stood my ground, letting the legal authority in the room speak louder than her threats ever could. Karen's desperation was palpable, and her panic was almost cinematic. I could see the shift in her posture, the tiny shakes in her hands. She had barged into my cabin with the belief that she was untouchable, and now, with the state AG observing every move, she was exposed for exactly what she was, a petty enforcer of rules, blind to the law and entirely unprepared for accountability. But Karen wasn't done yet. Even in her panic, she was plotting her next move, and it was going to make this encounter even more intense. Karen's desperation didn't stop at words. It quickly morphed into action. Her eyes darted around the cabin, as if searching for an escape route, or worse, evidence she could manipulate to shift blame. Every movement she made screamed panic, the kind of panic that comes from realizing you've overstepped and are now exposed. But she wasn't just flustered. She was dangerous in her overconfidence, still clinging to the illusion that she could somehow intimidate me, even in front of the state attorney general. I need to check something outside, she blurted, grabbing a clipboard as if it gave her authority. I raised an eyebrow, sensing her attempt to regain control through theatrics. Of course, I said calmly, but remember, you're still on private property, and any further entry without permission will only add to your liability. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. She was too consumed by the need to act. She stormed toward the door, but instead of leaving, she paused halfway, turning back with a wild glare. You think you're clever, don't you? Thinking this is a game? Her voice was louder now, shaking with frustration. I enforce the rules around here. I'm protecting the community. She gestured wildly, as if her anger could somehow make her authority real. I stayed composed, letting her words crash harmlessly against the walls of my cabin. Protecting the community doesn't mean breaking the law or invading. Someone's home, I replied evenly. The state AG's presence was a silent yet powerful force. Karen's gestures faltered. Her anger could no longer hide the truth that she had acted recklessly. Then came the moment I'd been preparing for. I calmly walked over to my phone, opened a document detailing HOA violations and overreach cases, and glanced at her. Since you're so concerned about rules, maybe we should review your conduct in front of someone qualified to evaluate it. Her eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw real fear. The threat wasn't legal jargon, it was accountability. Karen's panic escalated. She shuffled papers, muttered under her breath, and even tried to interrupt. But I was firmly in control. Each attempt she made to regain authority was met with calm, logic and factual evidence. I could see the realization hit her. The narrative she had relied on for years, power over homeowners, unquestioned authority, unchecked enforcement, was collapsing in front of her. Finally, she slumped back, momentarily defeated. Her aggressive energy had shifted into a desperate retreat, a fleeting acknowledgement that she was outmatched. But the encounter wasn't over. She still had one last trick, one desperate move, and I could feel it coming. Karen's next action would determine whether this situation ended in humiliation or legal consequences. And by the time the day was over, she would know the true cost of violating boundaries, especially mine. Karen's final move came faster than I expected. She attempted to storm past me toward the cabin's main hallway, presumably to retrieve some papers or make a call, but her momentum faltered. The state attorney general subtly rose from their seat, a quiet but unmistakable signal that every step she took was being watched. Karen froze mid-stride, suddenly aware that this wasn't a private confrontation. It was a legal spotlight, and she was completely exposed. I stayed calm, speaking clearly, each word measured. Karen, you've made your position very clear today, but let's not forget, entering someone's private property without notice or consent is not just rude, it can be unlawful. I hope you understand the implications of what just happened. Her eyes darted nervously to the AG, who gave a small confirming nod. Karen's face went pale. She had overstepped in every possible way, and now she had no one to blame but herself. Her usual bravado was gone. I could see it in her trembling hands and the subtle quiver in her voice. For the first time, she was confronting the real consequences of her behavior. And it wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the pattern of HOA overreach she represented. Every action she had taken, every rule she had misused, was now under scrutiny. Karen tried to speak, to justify herself, but her words faltered. The AG stepped forward, calm but firm. "Ms. Karen," they said, their tone carrying both authority and gravity. "Unannounced entry into a private residence is unacceptable. You've created a situation that could have serious repercussions. Moving forward, adherence to proper legal procedure is mandatory." Karen's shoulders slumped. There was no comeback, no bluff left to play. She had been called out, officially, decisively, and publicly. I felt a quiet satisfaction, not from gloating, but from knowing that justice had been reinforced. My cabin was my sanctuary, and today I had protected it while exposing the recklessness of someone who believed rules were a shield for their ego. Karen's overreach had been challenged with facts, law, and the presence of someone with true authority. The imbalance of power that had once favored her was now reversed, and I could see the lessons sinking in. Before leaving, the AG offered a few final words. Residents have rights. Authority figures, including HOA officials, must respect them. This encounter should serve as a reminder that boundaries are not optional, they're enforceable. Karen muttered something under her breath, but the point had been made. She had no ground left to claim, and the humiliation, both legal and personal, was evident. As the door closed behind the AG, I took a deep breath. My cabin was safe again, my rights intact, and Karen's attempt at intimidation reduced to a cautionary tale. Sometimes, people overestimate their power, especially when they think no one is watching. Today, they learned that crossing the line can bring consequences they never expected. And for me, it was a victory that went far beyond a single confrontation. It was a statement. Private property is sacred, and audacity has limits.